The heavy wooden gavel struck the mahogany-sounding block in Family Courtroom 6A. To CEO Julian Vance, it was the triumphant crack of a starting pistol. To Eleanor Sterling, formerly Eleanor Vance, it was the sound of 12 years of her life being reduced to absolutely nothing. Julian adjusted the cuffs of his bespoke charcoal Tom Ford suit. He leaned back in his leather chair, a slow, predatory smile touching the corners of his mouth. Beside him, his high-priced defense attorney, Richard Sterling, no relation to Eleanor's maiden name, snapped his briefcase shut with a satisfied click. They had executed a flawless financial slaughter. Eleanor sat frozen at the petitioner's table. Her spine was perfectly straight, her hands clasped tightly together over a stack of meaningless financial disclosures. The diamond wedding band was already gone from her finger, leaving a pale phantom indentation. She did not cry. The humiliation was too profound, too suffocating for tears. Her breath hitched slightly, her manicured nails digging into her own skin to anchor herself to reality. For over a decade, Eleanor had been the invisible architect of Vance Logistics. When Julian was just an arrogant visionary with a maxed-out credit card and a leaky warehouse, it was Eleanor who had sold her grandmother's estate to fund his first fleet of trucks. It was Eleanor who had written the routing software code late at night while he slept. Yet, according to the deeply flawed prenuptial agreement she had been coerced into signing during a high-risk pregnancy, she was entitled to virtually nothing. The judge's final decree was a masterclass in legal theft. Julian maintained sole ownership of Vance Logistics, artificially valued during the proceedings at a laughable $2 million. Julian kept the sprawling 8-bedroom estate in the Hamptons. He kept the offshore accounts that predated their marriage. Eleanor was awarded a single lump sum payout of $200,000, a depreciated SUV, and joint custody of their 9-year-old son, Leo. There was zero spousal support. "Do not look at him," Victoria Hastings murmured. Victoria was Eleanor's attorney, a razor-sharp woman known for her icy demeanor in court. Right now, Victoria's jaw was locked tightly, her dark eyes flashing with unfiltered outrage. "He is waiting for you to break Eleanor. Deny him the pleasure." Eleanor swallowed the ash in her throat. She kept her eyes fixed straight ahead on the judge's empty bench. "He lied, Victoria." Eleanor whispered, her voice a hollow, fragile thing. "I know he lied about the company's valuation. We landed the European freight contract 7 months ago. The company should be worth 20 times what they put on paper." Victoria began packing her legal pads with sharp, frustrated movements. "I know he lied, but his lawyer is a ghost maker. Every time we subpoenaed the revenue reports, Richard produced immaculate ledgers showing massive operational losses. On paper, Julian is a struggling businessman, barely keeping his head above water. The judge only cares about the paper, Eleanor." Across the aisle, Julian stood up. He didn't even cast a glance in Eleanor's direction. He clapped his lawyer on the shoulder, laughed at a private joke, and strode out of the double oak doors like a conquering king leaving a battlefield. He left Eleanor sitting in the cold silence of the courtroom, completely erased from the empire she had built with her own hands. 10 hours later, the atmosphere could not have been more different. The private VIP lounge of the Obsidian Club in downtown Manhattan was bathed in dim amber light and the heavy bass of electronic music. Crystal champagne flutes clinked and $100 cigars burned. Julian Vance was throwing a divorce party, and the entire executive board of Vance Logistics had been invited. to the Houdini of Wall Street, cheered Marcus Julian's vice president of operations, raising a glass of Macallan. I have to admit, Julian, I was sweating bullets when her lawyer requested the European contract files. I thought Eleanor was going to take half the kingdom. Julian laughed. It was a deep, booming sound, utterly devoid of guilt or hesitation. You underestimate me, Marcus. You always have. I didn't build this empire just to hand half of it over, because a woman decided she was tired of playing the supportive wife. You just need to know how to trim the fat before the auditors arrive. Sitting beside Julian on the velvet sofa was Serena Croft. At 26, Serena was vibrant, ruthless, and currently wearing a diamond tennis bracelet that cost more than Eleanor's entire divorce settlement. Serena's official title at Vance Logistics was Global Marketing Consultant, a convenient lie that covered up the lavish weekend getaways to St. Bart's and Paris over the last 18 months. During the marriage, Eleanor had felt the cold sting of Julian's infidelity, the late nights, the perfume on his collars, but without hard proof, it meant nothing in a no-fault divorce state. Now, Julian didn't have to hide her in the shadows anymore. He wrapped a heavy arm around Serena's waist, pulling her flush against his side. So, Serena purred, tracing the lapel of Julian's velvet jacket with a manicured finger. Now that the dead weight has finally been cut loose, when do we start looking at the yacht you promised me, the Mediterranean, this summer? Julian smiled, kissing her forehead. Tomorrow, baby. The money is clear. We start completely fresh. No baggage, no leeches. Julian felt invincible. He genuinely believed he had executed the perfect crime. He had buried nearly $3 million in liquid assets right under the noses of a federal judge, a seasoned opposing counsel, and his own wife. He had won the game. But, miles away, in a cramped, dimly lit two-bedroom apartment that smelled of old paint and bleach, Eleanor was not sleeping. She stood by the window, wearing an oversized sweater, watching the city lights blur through the rain. Her son Leo was asleep in the next room, traumatized by the sudden loss of his home and his routine. Every tear her son had cried that evening felt like a physical knife twisting in Eleanor's ribs. Her phone buzzed on the cheap laminate kitchen counter. It was 11:45 p.m. The caller ID flashed Victoria Hastings' name. Eleanor picked it up, her fingers numb. Victoria, it's almost midnight. Is something wrong? Eleanor. Victoria's voice came through the speaker tight, fast and radiating a dangerous electrical energy. I need you to think back to last October, right before Julian started acting distant. Did he ever mention a logistics vendor called Apex Horizon? Apex Horizon. Eleanor repeated the syllables, feeling heavy and foreign on her tongue. The rain lashed against the thin glass of the apartment window, a stark contrast to the soundproofed floor-to-ceiling windows of the Hamptons estate she had just been exiled from. She closed her eyes, forcing her exhausted mind to rewind through the agonizing months that preceded Julian's sudden demand for a divorce. She remembered the late nights, the sudden locked doors, the way Julian would violently turn his phone face down whenever she entered the room. Wait, Eleanor said, her breath suddenly catching in her throat. Not by name, but I remember a night in late October. Julian was in his home office at 2 a.m. I brought him a cup of coffee. When I walked in, he slammed his laptop shut so hard I thought he had cracked the screen. I saw a logo before it went black. a silver arch over a dark horizon line. When I asked what he was working on, he screamed at me. He told me to stop suffocating him and act like a wife, not an auditor. On the other end of the line, Victoria Hastings exhaled a sharp, calculated breath. Apex Horizon LLC is listed as a third-party technology contractor on Julian's profit and loss statements, Eleanor. According to the documents Richard Sterling provided to the court, Vance Logistics paid this company $2.8 million in consulting and management fees over the last 12 months. Eleanor felt the blood drain from her face. The cramped kitchen seemed to spin. $2.8 million. For what? We never outsourced our primary tech infrastructure. I built the routing system. That is exactly what I argued, Victoria replied, her voice dangerously calm. But Julian's lawyer produced hundreds of pages of invoices showing that Apex Horizon provided an emergency fleet management software upgrade that ultimately failed, resulting in a massive net loss for Vance Logistics. It was the primary reason Julian's business valuation tanked so severely. The judge accepted it as a failed, highly expensive business venture. A terrible mistake, but a legal one. Eleanor shook her head, even though Victoria could not see her. Julian does not make $2 million mistakes. He is arrogant, but he is incredibly paranoid about capital. He would never blindly wire that kind of money to an outside vendor without testing the software first. You are absolutely right, Victoria whispered. He did not make a bad investment. Eleanor, I could not sleep tonight. Something about Julian's financial decline felt too clean, too meticulously engineered, so I ran a deep background check on Apex Horizon LLC. It is registered in Delaware. The registered agent is a corporate proxy service. It is a complete ghost company. A heavy, suffocating silence hung over the phone line. The only sound was the hum of the cheap refrigerator in Eleanor's apartment. I dug into the proxy service's filing history. Victoria continued, her tone sharpening into a lethal blade. I was looking for connected corporate entities. I did not find a corporation. I found a name. The initial registration fee for Apex Horizon was paid for by a private credit card belonging to a woman named Serena Croft. The name dropped into the quiet apartment like a live grenade. Eleanor knew exactly who Serena Croft was. She had seen the extravagant flower arrangements delivered to Julian's office with vague thank you notes. She had seen the younger woman at corporate galas draped in designer silk, looking at Eleanor with a thinly veiled expression of pity and amusement. Julian had claimed she was just a marketing consultant, an overly eager kid trying to climb the corporate ladder. He did not lose that money. Eleanor. Victoria said the pieces of the puzzle violently snapping together in the dark. He did not make a bad business decision. He systematically siphoned $2.8 million out of your marital estate, and he funneled it directly into a dummy corporation controlled by his 26-year-old mistress. He artificially bankrupted his own company on paper so he would not have to split the true profits with you. The shock that had paralyzed Eleanor for the past 24 hours vanished. It did not fade. It was instantly incinerated by a sudden, blinding inferno of absolute rage. The betrayal was no longer just emotional. It was a calculated, premeditated financial slaughter. Julian had not just broken her heart. He had actively plotted to leave her and their young son destitute, while he bought a new life with stolen wealth. He had sat in that courtroom wearing his bespoke suit and perjured himself with a smile. He had watched her sign her life away, knowing he had millions waiting in the shadows. Eleanor looked down at her hands. They were no longer trembling. Her posture shifted. The exhausted weeping mother vanished, replaced by the cold, brilliant architect who had built Vance Logistics from the ground up. Her spine straightened. Her heartbeat slowed down, settling into a deep, freezing rhythm. "Is it legal?" Eleanor asked, her voice dropping an octave completely devoid of its previous fragility. "It is called fraudulent dissipation of marital assets," Victoria snarled. "And if we can prove it, it is not just grounds to completely tear up the divorce decree. It is a federal felony." Eleanor turned to look at the closed door of her son's bedroom. Julian had taken Leo's home. He had taken Leo's security. He had laughed while doing it. "Victoria," Eleanor said, the devastating calm in her voice making the seasoned lawyer pause. "I do not just want the decree reversed. I want him ruined. I want every single thing he loves taken from him, just like he did to me." "Then get some sleep, Eleanor," Victoria replied, a fierce predatory satisfaction bleeding into her words. "Because tomorrow morning we are not going back to family court. I am introducing you to a man named Marcus Thorne. He is the most vicious forensic accountant on the East Coast. We are going hunting." Eleanor ended the call. She did not go to sleep. She walked into the tiny bathroom, splashed freezing water on her face, and looked at her reflection in the mirror. The woman who had cried in the courtroom was dead. The woman looking back at her was entirely untouchable. Julian Vance had celebrated leaving her with nothing. He was about to find out exactly what happens when the woman he broke decides to freeze his entire empire. The next morning, the sky over Manhattan was the color of bruised iron. Eleanor Sterling did not wear the pastel, soft-spoken outfits Julian had always preferred for her public appearances. She wore a tailored charcoal gray trench coat over a sharp black suit. Her heels clicked with rhythmic, devastating precision against the cracked pavement of the industrial district where Marcus Thorne kept his office. Marcus did not operate out of a gleaming glass tower on Wall Street. His workspace was a converted loft in Brooklyn, humming with the relentless heat of massive server racks and smelling faintly of stale coffee and ozone. Marcus looked less like a certified public accountant and more like a tired homicide detective. He wore an untucked dress shirt and had dark circles under his eyes that spoke of a man who spent his life hunting ghosts in the digital ether. When Victoria laid the massive binder of Vance Logistics financial disclosures on his cluttered desk, Marcus did not blink. He just poured 3 cups of black coffee and cracked his knuckles. "The divorce diet," Marcus muttered, his voice a gravelly baritone as he flipped through the first 20 pages of the settlement. "It is the oldest trick in the wealthy scumbag playbook. You starve the marital estate before you serve the papers, so your spouse gets a percentage of 0. But moving nearly $3 million without leaving a digital breadcrumb is virtually impossible. Richard Sterling is a brilliant defense attorney. He would not let his client do something this arrogant unless the money was buried incredibly deep. Can you unbury it?" Eleanor asked. Her voice was perfectly level, entirely devoid of the panic that usually accompanied betrayed spouses in Marcus's office. Marcus looked up, studying Eleanor's face. He saw the cold, unyielding iron in her eyes and nodded slowly. "Depends. I need the original digital invoices Julian submitted for this Apex Horizon Shell Company. I need to see the metadata. If this was a fake company, someone had to generate those invoices to present to the judge. People are incredibly lazy. They use standard templates. They leave digital fingerprints. For the next 4 hours, Eleanor and Victoria sat in the dim office watching Marcus work. His fingers flew across his keyboards, pulling data from the court-approved discovery files and running them through proprietary forensic software. Eleanor did not pace. She did not fidget. She sat perfectly still, her mind meticulously cataloging every piece of evidence that proved the man she had loved for 12 years was a monster. At exactly 2 in the afternoon, Marcus stopped typing. A slow, cynical smile spread across his face. "Okay, ladies, welcome to fraud." 101 inches, Marcus announced, tapping his computer monitor with a heavy pen. He turned the large screen so Eleanor and Victoria could see. On the left, we have an invoice from Apex Horizon billing Vance Logistics for $150,000 for a custom routing software integration. This was submitted to the family court as hard evidence of Julian's crippling business expenses. Eleanor squinted at the screen. The document looked incredibly official. It featured a sleek corporate logo, a Delaware tax identification number, and an itemized breakdown of hourly consulting rates. Now, Marcus continued pulling up a second document on the right side of the screen. We have a completely unrelated invoice. This one is from a local IT vendor called Nexus Tech Support Billing, Vance Logistics, for $2,000 for routine server maintenance back in 2023. Do you notice anything? Victoria leaned in her eyes, darting between the 2 digital pages. The font is exactly the same. Not just the font. Marcus corrected, his eyes gleaming with the thrill of the hunt. The margin alignments are identical down to the microscopic pixel. The unique invoice numbering system uses the exact same randomized alphanumeric sequence algorithm. It is the exact same custom-built Excel template. Julian took an old IT invoice, wiped the text, slapped a fake Apex Horizon logo on it, and changed the numbers to drain his own corporate accounts. Eleanor stared at the screen, a chilling realization washing over her. Julian did not do this. Julian is a charismatic salesman. He barely knows how to format a basic spreadsheet, let alone code an automated Excel macro to generate hundreds of randomized, untraceable invoices. Someone built this system for him. Exactly, Marcus agreed, pulling up a dense payroll ledger. Based on the internal company emails, I just scraped someone with serious IT knowledge, created these fake documents. Let us look at Vance Logistics vendor payouts for the 3 months prior to the divorce filing. If Julian hired a tech contractor to forge these documents, he had to pay him off to keep him quiet. The room fell dead silent, except for the clicking of Marcus's mouse. Eleanor felt the air grow thin. If Julian had been smart enough to pay his accomplice in physical cash, the trail would end right here, leaving her with suspicions but no proof. "Gotcha. You arrogant, careless fool," Marcus breathed out. He highlighted a single line on the sprawling spreadsheet. It was a wire transfer for $80,000 to an independent contractor listed as Caleb Pierce Consulting. "A severance package," Victoria guessed. "Hush money," Marcus corrected. But here is the truly beautiful part. Here is where arrogant men always hang themselves. Julian did not wire this money from his domestic business account. He wired it from a private offshore account in the Cayman Islands, an account that, according to these routing numbers, was created the exact same week he filed for divorce. An account he swore under oath did not exist. Victoria stood up so fast her chair scraped violently against the floor. He committed explicit perjury. He signed a sworn affidavit stating all international assets were disclosed. It gets much worse, Marcus said, his voice dropping into a deadly serious register. I just ran the routing number of that Cayman account through a global SWIFT tracking database. That account is not dormant. It is highly active. Over the last 48 hours, Julian has been transferring massive amounts of liquid capital out of that account. To where? Eleanor asked, the frost in her voice hardening into solid ice. Marcus looked directly at Eleanor. He is cashing it out. He is moving the entire $2.8 million into a private real estate trust fund in the Bahamas. A trust fund registered exclusively under the name of Serena Croft. The final piece of the puzzle locked into place. Julian was actively buying a multi-million-dollar life with his mistress, using the exact wealth Eleanor had sacrificed her youth to help him build. He was attempting to leave Eleanor with nothing but a depreciated car and broken memories while he sailed away on a sea of stolen money. "Victoria," Eleanor whispered. The sound was not a plea. It was a cold, absolute command. "We do not just file an appeal," Victoria stated. Her eyes locked on the offshore routing numbers. The minute that money clears the Bahamian Central Bank, it disappears behind a fortress of corporate secrecy laws. We have less than 48 hours. Marcus leaned back in his chair. Then we need the smoking gun. We need to find this Caleb Pierce kid, and we need to break him before Julian's money crosses the border. Eleanor stood up. She smoothed the front of her charcoal coat, her expression completely unreadable. "Find him. I will handle the rest." Tracking down Caleb Pierce took Marcus Thorne exactly 3 hours and 14 minutes. Julian Vance was a master of corporate manipulation, but his blinding arrogance had caused him to ignore the digital trails left by the people he used. He had wired $80,000 to a 24-year-old independent IT contractor, assuming the money would buy permanent, unquestioning silence. But young men with sudden influxes of cash do not disappear into the shadows. They buy things. Caleb Pierce had recently purchased a slightly overpriced modern condominium in the suburbs of Portland, Oregon, paying a massive down payment via a direct wire transfer from the exact Cayman Islands account Julian had secretly funded. By 6 o'clock on Wednesday morning, the sky outside Marcus's Brooklyn loft was still dark. Eleanor, Victoria, and Marcus were gathered around a heavy steel desk. A secure, encrypted conference phone sat in the center of the table, its red light blinking steadily in the dim, quiet room. Marcus tapped his fingers against the wood, a grim expression settling on his face. "He is not a hardened criminal mastermind," Marcus said quietly, looking across the table at Eleanor. "He is a naive tech kid who got in way over his head. Julian probably fed him some elaborate lie about tax deferrals and corporate restructuring. But right now, Caleb Pierce is the only thing standing between Julian Vance and a federal indictment. We have to break him, and we have to do it fast." Marcus reached out and dialed the phone number tied to Caleb's newly established utility records. It rang 3 times. On the 4th ring, a groggy, hesitant voice answered the line. "Hello?" "Caleb Pierce," Marcus said, his voice dropping into the authoritative, terrifying cadence of a federal investigator. "My name is Marcus Thorne. I am a forensic auditor calling from a secure line. I am currently staring at a SWIFT transfer log showing exactly $80,000 moving from an undeclared Cayman Islands account belonging to Julian Vance directly into your personal checking account. I also have the metadata proving you designed the macro templates for the Apex Horizon Shell Company. There was a sharp, jagged intake of breath on the other end of the line. The sound of something plastic clattering to the floor echoed loudly through the speaker. "I do not know what you are talking about," Caleb stammered, raw panic instantly bleeding through his voice. "I did legitimate consulting work for Vance Logistics. I built internal software. I swear to God." Victoria leaned closer to the microphone, her voice slicing through the tense air like a surgical scalpel. "Stop talking, Caleb. Listen to me very carefully. My name is Victoria Hastings. I represent Julian Vance's ex-wife. As of this exact second, this is a civil family court matter. But tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock, I am walking this entire file into the United States Attorney's Office. You are currently looking at accessory to commit wire fraud conspiracy, to commit perjury and tax evasion. You are an accessory to a multi-million-dollar federal crime." "I did not steal anything." Caleb's voice cracked his defensive facade, crumbling entirely. "Mr. Vance told me it was an internal tax deferment strategy. He told me his corporate lawyers had cleared the entire process. I just built the spreadsheets. I did not move any of the money." "He lied to you, Caleb." Eleanor spoke for the first time. Her voice was not loud, but it possessed a heavy, devastating gravity that seemed to instantly freeze the air in the room. It was the voice of a woman who had been stripped of everything and had forged herself into absolute steel. On the other end of the phone, Caleb went completely silent. "Julian Vance used you to hide the wealth he owed his family." Eleanor continued, her tone mercilessly calm. "He used you to artificially bankrupt the company I built so he could steal the money and run away with another woman. And when the FBI kicks down his door, do you know what he will do? He has a team of millionaire defense attorneys who will point the finger directly at you. They will say, you were a rogue contractor who embezzled company funds. They will throw you to the wolves, Caleb, and you will spend the next 10 years in a federal penitentiary while he strikes a comfortable plea deal." A suffocating, terrified silence stretched across the line. The reality of the situation crashed down heavily on the young engineer. Eleanor did not need to yell. The pure, unadulterated truth of her words was far more terrifying than any legal threat Victoria could possibly make. "I kept a backup," Caleb whispered. His voice was shaking so violently the words barely registered. Marcus's eyes widened, locking onto Victoria. "What kind of backup?" Marcus asked, leaning sharply into the speaker. "I knew he was sketching me out," Caleb confessed, the words spilling out in a desperate, panicked rush. "When Julian told me to wipe my hard drives and destroy the original files, I got paranoid. I did what he asked, but I kept a hidden flash drive. It has the raw, unlocked Excel templates for the Apex Horizon invoices." "Templates are circumstantial, Caleb," Victoria snapped. "Julian's lawyers will just claim you acted alone to extort him. We need concrete proof that Julian directed you to commit the fraud." "I have it," Caleb choked out. Julian was too careful to put his instructions in an email. He would call me on Microsoft Teams late at night to tell me exactly what dollar amounts to put on the fake bills. I used a background screen recorder to capture the audio and video of 4 different meetings. I have Julian on tape explicitly instructing me to make the invoices look exactly like the old Nexus Tech bills, so his wife's forensic accountant would not look twice. Victoria closed her eyes, letting out a long, slow exhale of pure victory. It was the absolute holy grail of corporate litigation. It was the smoking gun that would tear Julian's empire down to the foundation. "Caleb," Victoria said, her voice turning crisp and fiercely professional. "Marcus is sending you a secure military-grade encrypted drop link to your email right now. If those raw files and those audio recordings are in my inbox in the next 5 minutes, I will personally petition the court for full immunity regarding your involvement. You will be a protected whistleblower. But if you hesitate for even 1 second, I am calling the FBI and they will raid your condo before noon." "Sending it now," Caleb gasped. "Just please keep me out of jail." Marcus watched his secondary monitor intently. A progress bar appeared on the screen, rapidly filling with green light. 3 minutes later, a heavy zip file landed in the secure server. Marcus clicked it open. There, sitting perfectly preserved in the digital ether, were the raw macro files and 4 pristine MP4 video files. Marcus clicked play on the first video. The screen filled with Julian Vance's arrogant, grinning face, sitting relaxed in his Hamptons home office. "Just copy the formatting from the old Nexus invoices, Caleb." Julian's recorded voice echoed loudly through the loft. "Change the dates, randomize the invoice numbers, and make the total exactly 2.8 million. My wife's lawyer is a pit bull, but she does not know a damn thing about server architecture. By the time they figure it out, the money will be gone." Marcus hit pause. He looked up at Eleanor. Eleanor stared at the frozen image of her ex-husband's face on the monitor. There was no pain left in her eyes. There was only a cold, elegant executioner waiting to drop the blade. "We have him," Marcus breathed. "Yes," Eleanor said, turning toward the door, her sharp heels echoing on the concrete floor. "Now we freeze his life." By Thursday morning, Victoria Hastings was not standing in the familiar crowded halls of the county family court. She and Eleanor were walking through the towering marble corridors of the United States Federal Courthouse in downtown Manhattan. The atmosphere here was entirely different. There were no weeping spouses or bitter custody disputes echoing off the walls. This building was a fortress of absolute, unforgiving consequence. Eleanor moved with devastating grace. Her charcoal trench coat swept past the federal security checkpoints without a hint of hesitation. Her posture was flawless, her expression an impenetrable mask of cold composure. She did not look like a woman who had been stripped of her life's work just 48 hours prior. She looked like an executive arriving to finalize a hostile takeover. They bypassed the main courtrooms and were escorted directly into the private, heavily guarded chambers of the Honorable Judge Harrison Caldwell. Judge Caldwell was a terrifyingly sharp man in his late 60s, possessing a reputation for zero tolerance when it came to corporate malfeasance. He did not like emergency *X party. *. Hearings legal motions filed by one party without the other present, unless the sky was actively falling. "Counselor," Judge Caldwell rumbled, looking over his reading glasses as Victoria and Eleanor took their seats in the heavy leather chairs across from his massive mahogany desk. "You are asking me to unilaterally freeze the entire operational capital of a multi-million-dollar logistics firm, as well as the private offshore accounts of an American citizen, without allowing his defense counsel the opportunity to be heard. This had better be extraordinary, Miss Hastings." "The defense has already been heard in family court, Your Honor, and they lied," Victoria stated, her voice slicing through the quiet room. She placed a massive, meticulously tabbed binder onto the center of the judge's desk. Julian Vance committed egregious premeditated perjury. He submitted fabricated business expenses to artificially bankrupt his marital estate, utilizing the federal wire system to execute the fraud. Judge Caldwell frowned, his eyes dropping to the binder. Family court disputes rarely warrant a federal asset freeze. If he hid assets, you file an appeal with the original presiding judge. With respect, Your Honor, this is no longer just a domestic dispute. Victoria countered smoothly. Julian Vance is currently moving $2.8 million of stolen marital capital through a Cayman Islands holding account, actively routing it into a blind real estate trust in the Bahamas. If that money settles into the Nassau central banking system, it disappears behind a wall of offshore corporate secrecy laws, and my client is left permanently destitute. I have included the sworn affidavit of the IT contractor he hired to forge the documents, the raw digital macro files, proving the forgery, and the global SWIFT transfer logs. Judge Caldwell opened the binder. For 10 minutes, the only sound in the imposing office was the rustle of paper. He read through Marcus Thorne's forensic tracing of the stolen wealth. He scrutinized the side-by-side comparisons of the forged Apex Horizon invoices against the legitimate IT bills. The deeper the judge read, the tighter his jaw clenched. Judges, above all else, possess a lethal disdain for being played for fools by arrogant men in expensive suits. To use the justice system as a weapon for fraud was a cardinal sin. These digital traces are compelling, Counselor, Caldwell said, his voice dropping into a dangerously low register. But I need absolute certainty before I freeze a corporation. A clever defense attorney could argue the IT contractor acted alone to embezzle funds. Victoria did not argue. She simply reached into her briefcase, pulled out a sleek silver laptop, and turned the screen to face the judge. She hit play. Julian Vance's arrogant, self-satisfied voice filled the quiet federal chambers. Asterisk. Just copy the formatting from the old Nexus invoices. Caleb. Change the dates, randomize the invoice numbers, and make the total exactly $2.8 million. My wife's lawyer is a pit bull, but she does not know a damn thing about server architecture. By the time they figure it out, the money will be gone. Asterisk. The video continued showing Julian casually drinking a glass of scotch while actively orchestrating a federal crime. When the clip ended, Victoria closed the laptop. The silence that followed was suffocating. Judge Caldwell slowly took off his reading glasses. He looked directly at Eleanor, who had sat in perfect statuesque silence the entire time. Mrs. Sterling. The judge addressed her, using her maiden name, a subtle but profound acknowledgement of her autonomy. According to these early corporate filings, you were the lead software architect for Vance Logistics during its first 7 years of operation. Is that correct? It is, Your Honor, Eleanor replied. Her voice was steady, refined, and entirely devoid of emotion. I built the routing infrastructure that allowed the company to secure its current European freight contracts. Julian Vance provided the initial capital, but I built the machine. Judge Caldwell nodded slowly. He looked back at the offshore routing numbers. This trust in the Bahamas, it is registered exclusively to a Serena Croft. Who is she? Mr. Vance's 26-year-old mistress, Your Honor, Victoria answered sharply. A cold, dark fury settled over the judge's features. He picked up a heavy gold-plated fountain pen. He did not ask any more questions. He pulled the emergency injunction order toward him and signed his name at the bottom with violent slashing strokes. "Motion granted," Judge Caldwell declared, his voice ringing with the absolute authority of the federal government. He handed the freshly signed document to his clerk, who immediately began scanning it into the federal database. "I am placing a global impenetrable freeze on every single account tied to Julian Vance's Social Security number and corporate tax identification. Domestic, international, personal, and business. I want a complete financial lockdown implemented within the hour." "Thank you, Your Honor," Victoria said, closing her briefcase. "Do not thank me yet, Counselor." Caldwell interrupted, his eyes hard. "Once this freeze is executed, I am forwarding this entire file to the United States Attorney's Office for the Southern District. I believe they will be very interested in having a conversation with Mr. Vance about conspiracy to commit wire fraud. He thought he could use my courts to steal from his wife. He is about to find out how the federal government handles thieves." Eleanor and Victoria walked out of the federal courthouse, the heavy oak doors closing behind them. The crisp autumn air felt entirely different now. It did not feel like the bitter chill of defeat. It felt like the sharp, clean air of an approaching storm. Eleanor stopped on the marble steps and checked her watch. It was exactly 10:00 a.m. Julian Vance thought he was untouchable. He thought he had outsmarted the world. He had absolutely no idea that a catastrophic financial guillotine had just been dropped directly over his neck, and the blade was already falling. Friday afternoon was breathtakingly beautiful. A perfect sun-drenched day that felt custom-made for the ultra-wealthy. The sky over the Miami marina was a flawless, piercing blue, reflecting off the pristine white hulls of luxury superyachts bobbing gently in the harbor. Julian Vance stood on the polished teak deck of an 80-foot Sunseeker Predator, holding a crystal flute of complimentary vintage Dom Perignon. Serena Croft stood next to him, wearing an oversized designer sun hat and a sheer silk cover-up running her manicured hands over the custom Italian leather upholstery of the captain's chair. "It is absolutely perfect, Julian," Serena cooed, throwing her arms around his neck and pressing a kiss to his jaw. "Can you imagine the parties we can host on the aft deck? We could take it down to Monaco for the Grand Prix next spring. My friends are going to absolutely die when they see it." Julian smiled, a deep, satisfied grin settling onto his handsome face. Life was quite simply spectacular. He had won the ultimate game. He had kept his multi-million-dollar logistics empire, discarded his aging, demanding wife, secured a gorgeous younger girlfriend, and successfully hidden nearly $3 million in untraceable cash. He was about to spend it like a lottery winner who had rigged the entire system. "Wrap it up," Julian told the yacht broker, a slick-haired, overly eager man named Christian. "We will take it. 3.2 million as discussed. An exceptional choice, Mr. Vance." Christian beamed, his teeth blindingly white in the sun. He led them down the glass-paneled stairs into the air-conditioned, mahogany-lined main cabin, where his laptop and paperwork were meticulously set up on a marble dining table. "If we can just process the initial wire transfer for the down payment, $500,000, we can have the title transferred, the registry updated, and the keys in your hand by Tuesday afternoon. Let us get it done," Julian said confidently. He reached into the inner pocket of his tailored linen suit jacket and pulled out his heavy black titanium bank card. It was a status symbol, a piece of metal that opened doors and commanded instant respect. He set it on the marble table with a heavy, satisfying clink. Christian typed the details into his secure payment terminal, Julian preferring the immediacy of a wire logged into his highly secure mobile banking app to authorize the massive transfer to the brokerage's holding account. He typed in the $500,000 amount. He hit the authorize button. A little blue loading circle spun on the bright screen of his phone. Julian took another sip of his champagne, already picturing the Mediterranean coastline. Then the screen flashed violently red. Error. Transaction declined. Code 4004 account restricted. Julian frowned, his thumb hovering over the screen. Hold on. The cellular signal must be bad inside the cabin. Let me try it again. He refreshed the banking application. The screen reloaded, bringing up his primary account dashboard. For a terrifying suspended second, Julian felt the world violently tilt on its axis. His primary checking account, which usually held over $400,000 in operating cash, read $0. Status frozen. A sudden prickling cold sweat broke out across the back of Julian's neck. His heart gave a hard, unnatural thump against his ribs. He quickly clicked over to his corporate business accounts for Vance Logistics. $0. Status frozen. He swiped frantically to his offshore portals, the accounts tied to the Cayman Islands. Access denied. Assets seized. Is there a problem, Julian? Serena asked, her voice losing a fraction of its playful purr as she noticed the sudden sickly pallor draining the color from his face. Just a bank glitch, Julian muttered. His fingers were shaking slightly as he aggressively tapped the glass screen, trying to force the application to load a different reality. Give me 1 second, Christian. I need to make a quick call to my wealth manager. Their fraud detection algorithms are overly aggressive with large out-of-state purchases. Julian practically scrambled up the cabin stairs to the rear deck, desperate to step away from Serena and the broker. The Florida sun suddenly felt suffocating, beating down on his shoulders like a physical weight. He pulled up his contacts and dialed the direct, unlisted line to his private wealth manager at Chase Bank. The phone rang and rang and rang. Usually, his manager answered on the first ring, greeting him with obsequious praise. Finally, a customer service representative answered not his personal manager, but a standard corporate operator. "This is Julian Vance," he snapped, pacing the teak deck like a caged animal, trying to keep his voice down so Serena would not hear. "Why the hell are my accounts showing a zero balance? I am in the middle of trying to make a major purchase, and your system is completely locked up." "One moment, Mr. Vance. Let me check your file," the representative said neutrally. There was a long, agonizing pause, punctuated only by the rapid clicking of a computer keyboard. "Sir, I am seeing a global hold placed on all assets linked to your Social Security number and your corporate tax entities." "A hold by who? Lift it immediately," Julian demanded, the panic now fully clawing at his throat. "I cannot do that, sir," the representative replied, her voice tightening with bureaucratic finality. "The hold is a federal injunction mandated by the United States District Court. Specifically, it is an emergency asset freeze under the direct order of Judge Harrison Caldwell. The note on your file also flags a pending criminal investigation by the United States Attorney's Office for fraudulent dissipation of assets and federal wire fraud. We are legally prohibited from releasing any funds." Julian's phone slipped from his sweaty grip. It clattered loudly onto the polished wood of the deck, the screen cracking down the center. Wire fraud, Federal Injunction, Judge Caldwell. The words echoed inside his skull like a deafening death knell. Eleanor found out. He did not know how, he did not know when, but his ex-wife, the woman he had mocked, the woman he had left with absolutely nothing, had found the money. And she had not just called her divorce lawyer. She had called the federal government. Raw, visceral terror completely consumed him. He stood frozen on the deck of the multi-million-dollar yacht he could no longer afford, staring blankly out at the water. His massive empire, meticulously built on lies, forged invoices, and hidden ledgers, had completely vaporized into thin air in the span of a single afternoon. Julian, he turned slowly. Serena was standing at the top of the stairs, her designer sunglasses pushed up onto her head. She was looking at him, and for the first time, she did not look at him with admiration. She looked at him with sharp, calculating suspicion. "Christian needs the wire confirmation," Serena said slowly. "Are we buying the boat or not?" Julian opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He was completely stripped of his power, his money, and his arrogant armor. The illusion of his invincibility had shattered, leaving nothing but a desperate, ruined man standing in the sun. We have to go." Julian finally choked out his voice, a pathetic, raspy whisper. "Excuse me?" Serena's eyes narrowed. Christian stepped up behind her, holding the leather-bound contract. "Is there an issue with the bank, Mr. Vance? We can hold the vessel until Monday if it is a simple clearance issue." "No," Julian said, the reality of his utter destruction finally setting in. The yacht, the luxury, the Mediterranean, it was all gone, replaced instantly by the terrifying looming shadow of a federal prison cell. "The deal is off." He did not wait for Serena. He stumbled past her, ignoring Christian's confused protests, and practically ran down the boarding ramp. He was a king who had just realized his crown was made of glass, and Eleanor Sterling held the hammer. The weekend was a slow, agonizing descent into hell for Julian Vance. With his accounts entirely frozen, his black titanium cards were reduced to worthless pieces of plastic. The luxury penthouse he had rented in Miami, with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the ocean, suddenly felt like a suspended glass cage. By Sunday evening, the reality of the situation had fully crystallized for Serena Croft. She had spent the weekend frantically making calls to her own offshore contacts, desperately trying to find a loophole to access the Bahamian trust that was supposed to bear her name. When a high-priced consultant informed her that a United States federal injunction superseded any island banking privacy laws, her demeanor completely shifted. The gig was officially up. Julian sat on the edge of the white velvet sofa, his head buried in his hands. He wore the same wrinkled linen suit from the marina. He watched numbly as Serena dragged 3 massive monogrammed Louis Vuitton suitcases into the center of the living room. "What are you doing?" Julian croaked, his voice raw and hoarse from 2 days of panicked shouting at automated banking operators. Serena did not even look at him. She was busy folding a pristine cashmere sweater. "I am leaving Julian. I have a friend with a villa in South Beach. I am calling a private car." "You cannot leave," Julian pleaded, standing up, his hands trembling violently. "I need you right now. We can fight this. My lawyers are the best in the country. If we just—" "Your lawyers are not answering your calls because you cannot afford their retainers," Serena snapped, zipping the first suitcase with a harsh metallic finality. She finally stopped and looked at him, and Julian was absolutely terrified by the complete lack of warmth in her eyes. The adoring, playful gaze of the young mistress was entirely gone, replaced by the cold, razor-sharp calculation of a survivor cutting her losses. "You lied to me, Julian," Serena said coldly. "You told me the divorce was a clean break. You told me the money was free and clear." "It was for us," Julian yelled, desperate to rewrite the narrative. "I risked everything to build a life for us. It was stupid," she corrected, grabbing her designer handbag. "You played a game with the federal government and you lost. I am 26 years old. I am not spending the best years of my youth visiting a medium-security federal prison and putting money on your commissary account. Goodbye, Julian." The slam of the heavy penthouse door echoed through the cavernous room. Julian was entirely alone. Desperation is a powerful motivator. Stripped of his wealth, Julian pawned his $50,000 Rolex just to buy a last-minute economy-class ticket back to New York. He landed in the freezing, pouring rain on Monday morning. He didn't go to his corporate headquarters. He didn't go to the Hamptons estate. He went straight to the cracked, uneven pavement of the industrial district where Eleanor had been forced to rent her tiny apartment. He pounded on the cheap metal door, his chest heaving, his clothes soaked through with cold rain. The deadbolt clicked. The door opened. Julian expected to see the exhausted, weeping woman he had abandoned in the courtroom just days ago. Instead, Eleanor Sterling stood before him. She was dressed impeccably in a tailored navy blue blazer and crisp trousers. Her hair was perfectly styled, her posture flawless. She held a ceramic coffee mug, looking at him not with anger, but with the terrifying clinical detachment of someone examining a specimen under glass. Behind her, sitting casually at the small kitchen table with a laptop open, was Victoria Hastings. The lawyer offered Julian a small, terrifyingly polite wave. "Eleanor," Julian gasped, leaning heavily against the doorframe. The rage he expected to feel was entirely consumed by blinding, pathetic desperation. "Eleanor, please, you have to stop this. They have frozen my business. The company will go under. Hundreds of people will lose their jobs." "The company will not go under, Julian," Eleanor said evenly, taking a slow sip of her coffee. "Because as part of the civil lawsuit, Victoria is filing tomorrow to completely vacate our divorce decree. We are seizing Vance Logistics. Since you bought out my half using stolen marital funds, the federal court is going to award me a controlling 90% stake in the company." Julian stared at her, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish. You cannot run the company. I built that company. I built the company, Julian," Eleanor reminded him, her eyes turning to solid ice. "You just took the credit while I wrote the code in the dark." "I will go to jail, Eleanor," Julian pleaded, the tears finally welling in his eyes and spilling over his cheeks. The realization was physically crushing him. The yachts, the bespoke suits, the power, it was all gone, replaced by the terrifying, looming reality of a concrete cell. He dropped heavily to his knees on the wet concrete of the hallway. "Please, I am Leo's father. You cannot send your son's father to a federal penitentiary. I will give you everything. Just call off the hounds." Eleanor did not blink. She looked down at the man kneeling in the dirt before her. This was the man who had gleefully plotted to leave her destitute. The man who had laughed with his mistress while she packed her son's toys into cardboard boxes. "I did not send you to prison, Julian," Eleanor said, her voice a quiet, devastating hammer blow. "You drove yourself there. I simply handed the federal government the map." Julian reached a trembling hand out toward the hem of her trousers. "Eleanor, please? Eleanor took a single, elegant step back. "Do not ever come near my home again." She closed the door. The sound of the deadbolt sliding firmly into place echoed with terrifying, absolute finality. Outside in the freezing rain, the former king of Vance Logistics remained on his knees, utterly and completely ruined. The gleaming glass and steel monolith that housed Vance Logistics' global headquarters was designed to intimidate. Julian Vance had personally overseen the architectural details of the lobby, the imported Italian marble floors, the towering vaulted ceilings, and the imposing security turnstiles. It was a monument to his ego, a physical manifestation of his absolute control. But at precisely 8 o'clock on Monday morning, that control was violently and permanently shattered. The morning commute was in full swing when a synchronized fleet of 6 matty black SUVs jumped the curb and parked aggressively in the plaza directly outside the building's main revolving doors. Before the building, security guards could even react. The doors of the vehicles swung open in unison. 24 federal agents wearing windbreakers emblazoned with the bright yellow letters of the FBI and the IRS Criminal Investigation Division poured into the lobby. They did not walk. They moved with a terrifying tactical precision that instantly silenced the busy hum of the morning rush. "Federal agents, nobody touch their computers. Step away from your workstations immediately." The command echoed off the marble walls, sharp and unyielding. The head of building security, a retired cop who usually spent his days harassing delivery drivers, took one look at the federal badges flashing in the morning light and immediately stepped back, raising his hands in absolute surrender. Within 3 minutes, the federal government had completely commandeered the towering skyscraper. Elevators were locked down with override keys. The primary server room in the basement was cordoned off with yellow crime scene tape, while specialized cybercrime agents began mirroring every single hard drive, hunting for the digital remnants of Caleb Pierce's forged macros. Up on the top floor, the executive suite was absolute chaos. Julian's vice president of operations, the same man who had cheerfully toasted to Julian's fraudulent divorce victory at the VIP lounge just days prior, stepped out of his glass-walled office. His face flushed with indignation. He puffed out his chest, attempting to pull rank on the intruders. "Excuse me, what is the meaning of this?" the VP demanded, his voice echoing down the corridor. "Do you have any idea whose office you are tearing apart? I am going to have my legal team down here in 5 minutes." The lead FBI agent, a tall, stony-faced man named Special Agent Reynolds, did not even blink. He simply reached into his jacket, pulled out a thick, multi-page federal warrant signed by Judge Harrison Caldwell, and shoved it hard against the VP's chest. "United States District Court," Agent Reynolds stated coldly. "We are executing a search and seizure warrant for all physical and digital records relating to Julian Vance and Vance Logistics in connection with a multi-million-dollar wire fraud and corporate embezzlement investigation. If you attempt to access a computer or impede my agents, you will be arrested for obstruction of justice. Sit down and keep your mouth shut." The VP read the first paragraph of the warrant. The color completely drained from his face. His arrogant bravado evaporated into thin air. He slowly backed away, sinking into a reception chair, realizing with terrifying clarity that the invincible ship of Vance Logistics was currently sinking straight to the bottom of the ocean. 45 minutes later, a yellow cab pulled up to the curb outside the plaza. Julian Vance stepped out into the freezing drizzle. He looked atrocious. His bespoke linen suit was rumpled and water-stained from his pathetic groveling encounter on Eleanor's doorstep. His eyes were bloodshot, and his hands were shaking. He had come to the office driven by pure delusional desperation. He had a concealed wall safe behind the mahogany bookshelf in his corner office that contained $100,000 in emergency cash and a pair of untraceable burner phones. If he could just get to that safe, he could hire a cut-rate criminal attorney. He could run, he could survive. Julian strode across the plaza, trying to force his spine straight, trying to project the aura of the untouchable CEO he had been just last week. He pushed through the revolving glass doors. He stopped dead in his tracks. The lobby was a sea of federal agents. His employees, hundreds of them, were corralled near the security desks, murmuring in terrified, hushed whispers. Agents were walking out of the elevator banks carrying heavy cardboard boxes filled with his private ledgers, his hard drives, and his framed photographs. "Hey!" Julian shouted, his voice cracking with a mixture of outrage and sheer panic. "What the hell are you doing? This is my building. Put those boxes down." He tried to push past the security turnstiles, but a heavy hand slammed into his chest, stopping his momentum entirely. Two armed FBI agents stepped directly into his path, their expressions grim and unmovable. Special Agent Reynolds walked slowly across the marble floor, a pair of heavy steel handcuffs dangling casually from his left hand. He looked at Julian, taking in the ruined suit and the panicked, sweat-beaded forehead. "Julian Vance?" Agent Reynolds asked, though it was clearly not a question. "I am the CEO of this company," Julian snarled, trying to muster a final shred of authority. "I demand to know who authorized this raid." "The United States Attorney's Office authorized it, Mr. Vance," Reynolds replied, his voice echoing loudly in the silent lobby. Every single employee was watching. Every single eye was locked onto the fallen king. And as of this morning, federal court orders have seized all your controlling shares. You are trespassing. Julian's breath hitched. "You cannot do this. Let me call my lawyer." "You will have plenty of time to make a phone call from holding," Agent Reynolds said, stepping forward and swiftly grabbing Julian's arm, twisting it behind his back with practiced, inescapable force. "Julian Vance, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, federal tax evasion, and perjury. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." The cold, heavy click of the steel handcuffs snapping tightly around Julian's wrists sounded like a gunshot in the quiet lobby. It was the absolute, undeniable sound of total destruction. "Get your hands off me." Julian panicked, struggling weakly against the agents. "I built this empire. I am Julian Vance." "Not anymore," Reynolds whispered coldly. They did not take him out the private back entrance. They did not shield him from the press or his staff. The federal agents marched Julian Vance straight through the center of his own lobby. He walked past the receptionists he had ignored, the managers he had bullied, and the executives he had corrupted. Nobody looked away. Nobody offered to help. They watched in absolute judging silence as the man who had celebrated leaving his wife with nothing was paraded out the front doors in iron chains, stripped of his wealth, his power, and his dignity. Outside, the flashing red and blue lights of the federal cruisers reflected off the wet pavement. Julian was forcefully shoved into the back of a sterile, caged SUV. The door slammed shut, plunging him into the dark. The empire was dead, but the Queen was about to return. For 2 agonizing weeks, the corporate headquarters of Vance Logistics existed in a state of terrifying suspended animation. The federal raid had left the executive floor looking like a war zone. Half the filing cabinets were emptied. Computer servers were still wrapped in federal evidence tape, and the company's stock price was violently hemorrhaging. In the sprawling glass-walled boardroom on the 50th floor, the remaining executive board gathered for an emergency crisis meeting. The air in the room was thick with panic and the sour smell of stale coffee. Marcus, the vice president of operations, sat at the head of the long mahogany table, sweating profusely through his expensive suit. He was desperately trying to project authority, attempting to hold the crumbling empire together, while Julian Vance sat in a federal holding cell awaiting trial. "Listen to me," Marcus barked, slamming his palm against the table to silence the murmuring board members. "Julian is gone. The feds have his shares frozen, but the operational capital has just been released back to the corporate accounts this morning. We still have the European freight contract. If we can just bypass the encrypted Munich servers and manually route the shipments, we can salvage the quarter. We just need to hold the line until the board elects an interim CEO." The heavy double doors of the boardroom suddenly swung open. The frantic chatter in the room instantly died. Every head turned. Eleanor Sterling stepped over the threshold. She did not look like the exhausted, shattered woman who had signed divorce papers in tears just a month ago. She wore a razor-sharp tailored ivory suit that radiated cold, untouchable power. Her dark hair was swept back flawlessly, and her posture was completely unyielding. The only sound in the cavernous room was the devastatingly precise, rhythmic asterisk click, 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 asterisk of her sharp heels against the imported marble floor. Victoria Hastings walked a half step behind her, carrying a sleek leather briefcase, looking like an executioner arriving to read a final sentence. Marcus stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor, his face flushed with a mixture of residual arrogance and rising panic. "Eleanor," Marcus said, his voice laced with condescension, "you absolutely cannot be in here. This is a restricted floor. The building is still under federal scrutiny, and we are in the middle of a critical crisis management meeting. I do not have the time or the patience to deal with your personal revenge tour right now. Security." Eleanor did not stop walking. She did not raise her voice. She simply moved to the opposite end of the long mahogany table and rested her manicured fingertips lightly against the polished wood. Her presence alone seemed to drop the temperature in the room by 10 degrees. "The European freight contract is failing, Marcus," Eleanor said, her voice a smooth, icy calm that commanded absolute silence. "Because the secondary relay servers in Munich are currently running on the legacy codebase I wrote 7 years ago. They are actively rejecting the bloated outsourced software patch you authorized last month because you do not understand the first thing about server architecture." Marcus stared at her, his mouth opening and closing in stunned silence. The rest of the board members shifted uncomfortably in their expensive leather chairs. How do you know about the Munich override?" Marcus stammered, all of his bravado instantly evaporating. "Because I designed it," Eleanor replied smoothly, her dark eyes locking onto his. "While you and Julian were playing golf on Friday afternoons and drinking Macallan in the VIP lounge, I was patching the software that kept this company from going bankrupt in its 3rd year. I built the infrastructure you are currently standing on." Victoria stepped forward, opening her briefcase. She withdrew a stack of thick, gold-sealed legal documents and began sliding them across the table to the stunned executives. "Ladies and gentlemen of the board," Victoria announced, her voice ringing with lethal professional clarity. "As of 8 o'clock this morning, the United States Family Court, operating in direct conjunction with the Federal Asset Forfeiture Division, has officially vacated the original divorce decree between Eleanor Sterling and Julian Vance. Due to the egregious documented fraud committed by the former CEO and to satisfy the stolen marital assets, legal fees, and massive punitive damages, the court has seized Julian Vance's entire controlling interest." Victoria paused, letting the devastating reality hang in the air. The court has awarded all seized shares intellectual property and holding rights directly to the petitioner. Eleanor Sterling now officially owns 92% of this corporation. She is not a guest. She is your sole proprietor and acting chief executive officer. The silence in the boardroom was absolute. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of men who suddenly realized they were sitting in a room entirely owned by the woman they had treated as a joke. Marcus's face went completely pale. His eyes darted around the table, looking for an ally, but the other executives were entirely frozen, frantically trying to calculate their own survival. Marcus swallowed hard, forcing a sickening, artificial smile onto his face. He immediately tried to pivot. Eleanor Marcus backpedaled, his voice taking on a desperate pleading tone. "I mean, Miss Sterling, this is actually fantastic news. Julian was out of control. We all knew it. With my operational contacts and your brilliant software background, we can stabilize the European sector by tomorrow. I am fully prepared to brief you on the—" "Marcus," Eleanor interrupted. Her voice was barely above a whisper, but it sliced through his desperate groveling like a guillotine blade. He froze. Eleanor tilted her head slightly, studying the man who had cheered for her ruin. "You toasted to my financial destruction. You laughed while Julian hid the money that was meant for my son's future. You are not an operational asset. You are a parasite." She stood up completely straight, the full weight of her new, untouchable authority radiating from her. "You are fired, Marcus. Effective immediately. Your severance package has been entirely voided under the gross misconduct clause of your contract. You have exactly 10 minutes to pack your personal belongings before building security physically escorts you to the curb." Marcus stood there utterly destroyed. He looked around the room, but the other executives immediately dropped their eyes, severing their ties with the dead weight. Without another word, Marcus grabbed his suit jacket and walked out of the boardroom, while his career completely incinerated in a matter of seconds. Eleanor turned her gaze to the remaining board members. They were holding their breath, waiting for the slaughter to continue. Julian Vance built a culture of arrogance, theft, and incompetence, Eleanor stated, pacing slowly down the length of the table. That culture died the moment I walked through those doors. We are going to promote the mid-level managers who actually do the heavy lifting. We are going to rebuild the software architecture, and we are going to drop the dead weight. She walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out over the sprawling, sunlit Manhattan skyline. The city stretched out before her, vast and entirely open. As of this morning, Vance Logistics is officially dissolved, Eleanor declared, not looking back at them. Welcome to Sterling Global. Now open your laptops. We have an empire to run. 6 months later, the bitter chill of winter had finally surrendered to a crisp, unforgiving spring. The towering federal courthouse in downtown Manhattan was unnervingly quiet as Julian Vance was led through the heavy oak doors of courtroom 3B. He was not wearing a bespoke Tom Ford suit. He was wearing a standard-issue, ill-fitting beige jumpsuit provided by the Federal Corrections Facility. His posture, once rigid with unshakable arrogance, was completely broken. His shoulders slumped, his face was gaunt, and the silver streaks at his temples had rapidly multiplied. He had aged a decade in the span of 6 months. Eleanor Sterling sat in the front row of the gallery, flanked by Victoria Hastings and Marcus Thorne. She wore a flawlessly tailored dark emerald sheath dress that radiated an aura of quiet, untouchable power. She felt a strange, profound sense of detachment as she looked at the man being seated at the defense table. The monster who had once made her feel so small, so entirely worthless, no longer existed. Julian Vance was just a desperate, ruined criminal waiting for his inevitable bill to come due, facing a mountain of irrefutable digital evidence. Caleb Pierce's whistleblower testimony and the complete freezing of his assets, Julian had been left with no choice but to accept a plea deal. Taking the case to a jury would have risked a 20-year sentence. Instead, he had formally pleaded guilty to 2 counts of federal wire fraud, 1 count of conspiracy to commit tax evasion, and felony perjury. Judge Harrison Caldwell presided over the sentencing. He adjusted his reading glasses, staring down at the thick probation report on his desk, and then fixed his stern, unforgiving gaze on the broken man before him. "Mr. Vance," Judge Caldwell began, his voice resonating with heavy moral authority. "In my 30 years on the bench, I have seen men driven to commit crimes by desperate circumstances, by addiction, and by unforeseen tragedy. I can sometimes find a sliver of pity for those men, but you do not fall into any of those categories." Julian kept his head bowed, his hands clasped tightly together on the scarred wooden table. "You were driven by nothing but sheer, unadulterated greed and a profound, narcissistic arrogance." Caldwell continued, his tone cutting through the silent courtroom like a whip. "You accumulated millions of dollars, yet you begrudged the woman who helped you build that wealth her rightful share. You manipulated the justice system. You corrupted a young contractor, and you lied to a family court judge to financially ruin the mother of your own child, all so you could fund a lavish lifestyle with stolen money. You treated the law of the United States as a minor inconvenience to your personal pleasure." Julian sniffled a pathetic hollow sound in the large room. "Your Honor, I made terrible mistakes. I lost my way. I am deeply sorry." "You are sorry you were caught, Mr. Vance," Caldwell corrected, sharply, showing zero mercy. "Had Miss Sterling not possessed the brilliance and tenacity to uncover your fraud, you would be sailing a yacht in the Mediterranean right now, completely unburdened by a conscience. The court must impose a sentence that reflects the absolute severity of your deceit." Judge Caldwell picked up his heavy wooden gavel. "Julian Vance, on the charges of wire fraud and perjury, I sentence you to 48 months in a federal penitentiary, to be followed by 3 years of supervised release. You are further ordered to pay full restitution to the IRS for the taxes evaded on the hidden funds. Bail is permanently revoked. You are remanded into the custody of the United States Marshals immediately." The gavel fell. The sharp, violent crack echoed perfectly across the mahogany walls. It was a mirror image of the gavel strike in family court that had started this entire nightmare. But this time, It was not the sound of Eleanor's ruin. It was the sound of absolute poetic justice. Two federal marshals stepped forward, instructing Julian to put his hands behind his back. The cold, heavy click of the steel handcuffs snapping around his wrists was exceptionally loud in the silent courtroom. As the marshals turned him to lead him toward the side-holding cell, Julian's eyes frantically scanned the gallery until they found Eleanor. He looked at her. His face was pale, his eyes wide with raw, unconcealed terror. He was silently begging for some sign of pity, some microscopic shred of the love she had once held for him, a single tear to prove that he still mattered to her. Eleanor did not smile. She did not sneer. She did not cry. She simply held his gaze with the calm, devastating confidence of a queen who had walked through the fire and emerged entirely as steel. She looked at him as if he were nothing more than a stranger she had passed on the street. She gave him a single, barely perceptible nod of farewell. And then, with perfect agonizing grace, she turned her back on him. By the time the heavy side door slammed shut, taking Julian Vance out of her life forever, Eleanor was already moving forward. She walked out of the federal courthouse and into the bright, brilliant Manhattan sunlight. The air was clean. The shadows of the past year were completely gone. She had reclaimed the Hamptons estate, and Leo was back in his massive backyard, the trauma of the sudden upheaval fading into a distant memory. Sterling Global was thriving, expanding into new European markets, with a valuation that had skyrocketed past $20 million under her relentless leadership. Eleanor stopped on the marble steps, taking a deep, steadying breath. She had lost 12 years to a man who did not appreciate her, but she had gained the entire world in return. She stepped into her waiting Blacktown car, the door closing with a solid, satisfying thud. She was untouchable. What an incredible journey of absolute betrayal, fierce resilience, and ultimate justice. Eleanor's story serves as a powerful cinematic reminder that the truth always leaves a digital footprint, and arrogance is often the exact architect of its own destruction. Julian thought he could outsmart the law and discard the woman who built his empire, but he severely underestimated the terrifying power of a mother fighting for her future. From a devastating courtroom defeat to the absolute power of the CEO's chair, Eleanor proved that you can lose everything and still build something even greater from the ashes. What did you think of Julian's ultimate downfall? What moment made you feel that Eleanor had truly taken back her power? Do you believe that emotional justice and public regret are the best forms of revenge? Let us know your favorite twist in the comments below. If you enjoyed this dramatic story of cold revenge and redemption, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this video with anyone who loves a flawless karma story.